All right, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be joined by Catherine Pollard, who you know is the Undersecretary General for Management Strategy, Policy and Compliance, as well as the Comptroller of the UN, Chandramouli Ramanathan, who are here to brief you on the budget and financial situation of the organization. Catherine has some opening remarks, and then she'll take a couple of questions, and then Chandra will stay behind to answer more detailed budget questions. Catherine, please.
Thank you, Stefan, and good afternoon, everyone. So earlier today, I spoke to the Fifth Committee and discussed with them the serious financial situation that the United Nations now faces, more precisely, the liquidity situation of the organization in terms of available cash that is very dire. I won't repeat here what I said to the member states. It was an open meeting, and my statement, as well as the presentation that went with it, is available on the Fifth Committee website. So this situation, which, as you know, the Secretary General has described, is the worst cash crisis facing the UN in nearly a decade. It's not, I want to emphasize that it's not a budget crisis, it is a cash flow crisis. I made clear to the Fifth Committee, and the Secretary General has repeatedly done this year, that the financial health of the organization solely depends on member states meeting their financial obligations in full and on time. Timely contributions are crucial to ensure a stable and predictable financial situation throughout the year. We've always known that different member states pay at different times during the year. However, in recent years, there's a growing downward trend whereby every single year, the situation seems to become more difficult than the year before. The cash deficits occur earlier in the year, linger longer, and run deeper. For the second successive year, we've exhausted all the regular budget liquidity reserves, despite several measures we already put in place to try and reduce expenditures and to align them with available cash reserves. As a result of this cash crisis, the Secretary General informed member states earlier this week about a number of measures that are being implemented, and a letter was sent to all heads of entity across the organization as well as to member states yesterday evening. I'll just share with you a couple of examples of some of these measures that will go into place from next Monday. Interpretation and meeting services will be limited to official meetings of the calendar of conferences. So what does that mean? We will no longer be able to serve and service meetings of regional and other groupings that are what we call as available for services or as required. Meetings of intergovernmental bodies outside of regular hours being 10 to 1 and 3 to 6, we will not be able to support. There's going to be delays in issuing official documents. We have put on hold publishing and translating treaties and publications. We are curtailing official travel of staff to only essential activities. We are not going to be able to host events such as receptions before 8 in the morning or after 6. Cooling and heating services are going to be reduced, and some escalators to the floors already serviced by escalators will be shut down, as will the main fountain in the circle. So among the measures effective immediately, we are going to, as I said, travel will be limited to the most essential activities. Everywhere we're looking to see how we can reduce non-salary related costs as far as possible. So we know that there is going to be an impact. We really have no choice. We are at that stage in terms of the ability to run the business the way we always have. We really have to see how we can operate, not within the budget, but within the cash availability that we currently have. So, for instance, I know that many of you also go to some of the functions that are hosted by delegations in the delegates' rooms. Those functions are going to be curtailed from next Monday, so that won't be in operation after 6 p.m. Of course, we had several events that were in the pipeline, and we're currently reviewing all of those with the sponsors to see how we can accommodate them. So I just want to emphasize that the current crisis that we have there's been a lot of discussion about a particular member state. We are looking at this in terms of all member states who are obliged to pay their contributions in full and on time. And we have been in touch with member states who owe significant amounts of money to the organization to see and to encourage them that we can have that cash forthcoming so that we will be able to meet our obligations, both for salaries and for vendors, by the end of the year. So thank you very much. And
Thank you. Edie?
Thank you very much, Ms. Pollard. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you both for coming and doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I have two questions. First, why are countries delaying payments, and why do you see this as, you've indicated that this is a trend that's been worsening in recent years? Are there reasons that they give? Does the UN ask? And secondly, we all know who the big countries are that haven't paid yet. The biggest is the United States of America. Have you been in contact with people in the Trump administration, and what has their response been? Thank you.
we'll do question by question. Thank you very much for those questions. In terms of the reasons why member states have delayed paying, they have their own internal reasons. And for many of them, it's their own internal political situations. As you know, we had the scale of assessment last year at the end of December with a new scale that went into effect. Some countries, for instance, increased in their rates of contributions and internally perhaps had not made the same budgetary provisions. Some of them have different calendar years. There are a variety of reasons. Member states don't always share those reasons with us, but we do engage with them in terms of the amounts that they owe and keeping in touch with them about when we can expect payment. When we assess, member states are supposed to pay in 30 days, but we know that certainly for the largest contributors, we know what the payment patterns have been over several years. And unfortunately, in the ones that have traditionally always paid upfront and within on time, we've even seen delays in those payments. As I said, it's due to a number of internal political reasons. On the second one, yes, it is true that the United States is the largest contributor and they have a large outstanding amount. We are in active engagement with the permanent mission here and the permanent mission with Congress in Washington so that the money there can be movement on the money. I will say that we are in active engagement with all the member states who are owing large amounts to the UN because we really are very, very concerned about the cash flow and the impact that it has on us.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. First, the issue of transparency. Despite what Stefan said the other day, myself and my colleagues have tried to find on any of your websites the exact details of the countries, what they owe currently and what they owe in arrears. Surely that information, if you want them to pay up, the world needs to know who owes, number one. Number two, from my calculations, again, I don't have access to all the figures, I can't find them all, show that of those who owe money, the US owes more than all the others put together. So if that's the case, why don't you at least align your financial calendar with that of the US, which says it's going to be paying in the coming months?
I think I'll ask the controller to speak to the details of the amounts of money. I'm sure that he can give you some advice on where we can that information is available because we do have a portal on contributions that's available to the member states. I can tell you alignment of the changes in the calendar for the UN is a very long and difficult exercise. 25 years ago, we were able to achieve that for peacekeeping operations because the calendar year for the UN is January to December, and both the regular budget and peacekeeping had the same calendar year, and it became an inordinate burden on the member states, never mind the Secretariat, to be able to approve peacekeeping budgets and the regular budget in the same session. And so that's when the proposal was made in 1995 under Secretary General Boutros Ghali to be able to change the financial year for peacekeeping to 1 July to 30th June. I can tell you that it finally came after very intense and long rounds of discussion. So I think while your suggestion is very interesting, to be frank with you, I don't think that it's going to be very practical, and I think politically as well, I think it's going to be a challenge for all member states because member states feel very strongly that all member states should pay in full and on time. So this is also a political issue. So I don't think that will work. We understand the constraints of all member states. Yes, the United States is the largest contributor and has large amounts outstanding, but there are others as well, and we are in contact with all of them because we want all of them to pay.
Thank you. Chandra?
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I think we have information, as Ms. Pollard pointed out, there is a committee status of contributions portal that member states are able to consult. In addition to that, I think we have information posted on the Committee of Contributions itself. There's a website which shows more detail. And there's also the Fifth Committee website where even today's presentation is available. So there's quite a few places, and we can pass on the information about those.
Shouldn't it all be in one place as big headline figures to name and shame those who are not doing what they need to be doing because of these draconian measures that you're now having to take?
We have these presentations twice a year. And what we've seen in the past is typically around the time we make those presentations, cash tends to come in because people are very worried about being named and shamed. So we do already do that.
Michelle?
Thank you. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. Any chance you can give us like a ballpark value of the measures you just mentioned that will go into effect on Monday? And is furloughing staff something that the UN has considered?
Do you have the answer?
You can take it.
Go ahead. Yeah. I'll do the second one.
Okay. So let me start with what is that we're trying to do. At the beginning of the year, we already knew, based on our experience from last year, that this was going to be a difficult year. So right from the start of the year, we have been slowing down the hiring of people, asking all managers to manage within a tighter financial ceiling based on how it is approved. And that's one of the reasons why we've managed to pull on for the last 9 months based on our projections. We've also cut back on non-post related costs to compensate for the shortage. So we've managed it so far precisely by doing that. But we're reaching a point where now the inflow is even lesser than what we had anticipated. And that's what's causing us the situation. Typically, in a year, September and October are our worst times. Last year, we hit our deepest deficit in October. And we knew that we would again go into October. But this time, it started earlier, and it has become deeper because the inflows have slowed down. And I'm sure in a few follow-up questions, I will come to the size of the amounts that are also involved. Thank you.
On the question about have we considered furloughing staff, that would be very difficult for us because in furloughs, people don't get paid when they don't work, and we have contractual obligations to the staff. The UN contractual system just doesn't work in that way. But what we have done, as the controller just mentioned, was that we did look at our manning strength, or we tried to make sure that we maintained our vacancy rates in line with what was approved by member states in calculating the budget. So we did not go below that budgeted vacancy rate because we simply would not have the money to be able to pay the costs of those salaries with bringing on the full complement of staff. So we have had to stagger our recruitment of staff to make sure that we have the numbers that we could actually sustain with the cash that we have.
So sorry, just to follow up on my first question on the measures you announced, shutting down the escalators and the heating and the cooling. Like, what's the ballpark value that you're not having to pay for that?
The shortage that we are facing now, we have about $950 million that we need over the next 3 months. And we barely have about 145. If past trends are an indication, we could receive anywhere between 500 to 600 million in the last 3 months. But there's no certainty about either the timing or the quantum. So what we are trying to do is we need a minimum of about 450 odd million for the people who are already on board for whom we are contractually obligated to pay. So that leaves us only with another pool of about $500 million that we can move around, but many of them are for services like air charter, etc., which are critically needed. So when you look at all of that, essentially we're trying to ensure that we have enough cash to be able to settle the vendors' bills for October and November, and we expect the situation hopefully to ease by then. So in a nutshell, therefore, we are looking at a complement of about $200 to $250 million, which is the gap that we've experienced because of the slowing down of the money that was supposed to have come in. If it had come in on time, based on all the measures that we'd already taken, we would have been able to ride this storm.
Philippe Rater from AFP. Can you confirm that Antonio Guterres is going very soon to Washington to discuss on this subject, and if you can tell us the date?
No. I mean, I'm not able to confirm it at this point. Yep.
Thank you. Nabil Abisab, Al Arabi TV. Have some countries raised their contributions to the UN? And if yes, how much money we're talking about, and what countries, if you can give us some examples? And about travel cost, can you give us some examples about your some main operations maybe the UN is running on the ground in some countries around the world that will be affected by this cut?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I think the controller can respond on some of the precision on the numbers. In terms of looking at travel and other costs, this is not just for UN headquarters here in New York. We have actually, the Secretary General has written to all heads of entity, which means the heads of the UN offices in Geneva, in Vienna, in Nairobi, as well as all the heads of the regional commissions around Addis Ababa, Santiago, in Bangkok, and in Beirut, asking everyone to do the same, to see how they can conserve on travel or limit it only to the most essential meetings that people have to attend, even looking at meetings of representatives and delegates to see perhaps if we can actually postpone those meetings where the arrangements may not have yet been finalized. So these measures are not just for New York, it's for the organization worldwide.
Chandra?
One of the prime examples of the increase in the scales are revised every 3 years. And the new scales went into effect on January 1, 2019. And one of the largest increases was for China. China became the second largest contributor. And just to build on what Steph said before, this is a classic example of where, because of the extra money that they had to pay, and it was probably not budgeted and approved, they made their normal payment in the normal course. And then there was a delay in paying the increased amount because they had to go back to their Congress, get the payment. We have another example is the Republic of Korea. Their contribution has also gone up, not by the same magnitude, but it has gone up. But it resulted in a more or less similar situation where they normally make their payment very early in the year, which they did, which is the normal amount they would pay. And they haven't yet paid the extra amount. So it's based on a scale, which is set once in 3 years. So some countries pay more, other countries pay less. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the case of China, I would have to confirm it's probably about $130, $140 million for the regular budget, extra increase, yeah. Republic of Korea, about 10 million. Yeah.
Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Abdul Hamid Sayama from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Remembering Boutros Ghali, in his time there was a financial crisis and they issued a small leaflet, it's called Setting the Record Straight. And I recall in that pamphlet, it said, for every dollar the U.S. pays, it gets $2 back. There is a joint committee between New York City and the UN, and in the latest report, it said that New York generates $2 billion in business. So the only country that it's true the U.S. is the largest contributor, contributor, but is also the largest recipient of revenues because of the UN headquarters in New York City. Why you don't raise these issues when you discuss the budgetary issue and the contribution of the U.S. with the U.S. officials? Thank you.
Oh, sorry. When we meet with the officials, the benefits that, yes, accrue to our host country, as you just indicated what's in those reports, but we also have benefits that accrue to other host countries, as well. And we have host countries wherever we have the UN premises. We are not in the business of targeting member states in terms of what benefits may accrue to them. Benefits also accrue to member states from a variety of UN operations, including how we procure goods and services from them to service the various operations. For us, when we engage in member states, it's a question of principle in terms of what their obligations are in terms of the budget, and when we assess them and what we expect from them and what our needs are.
Thank you. Catherine has to go, but Chandru is going to remain to answer questions. Thank you very much, Catherine.
That way?
Yeah. Well, I'll get you, James. Yep, and then to Evelyn.
Thank you very much. So perhaps I'm a bit late to this, but I'm aware that the SG sent a letter to all department heads outlining the measures that will be taken. Is this letter public yet? And if it's not public, could we get a copy of that? And secondly, are these measures temporary, or will they be from now on?
I mean, we can share the letter with you, but maybe you want to address on the timeliness of the measure.
The measures that we put in place now are to conserve cash and see us through the rest of the year. Otherwise, we would not have had to add those additional measures that we've taken now, because we're already managing the situation based on the liquidity. And the Secretary General's letter also clarifies that because of the liquidity crisis, we are no longer able to run the programs based on our programmatic goals. We are forced and we are constrained to run it on the basis of the liquidity that we have. So the hope is that as the situation tends to ease towards the end of the year, we'll be able to revisit some of the measures, but not maybe all of them, because we'll have to see how next year will work out. How we end the year is just as important.
Evelyn?
Sorry, did you say we were going to or not get a copy of the letter?
I said we will.
We will. Okay, thank you. Do you have this exact amount that the United States owes? Can you tell us that? And secondly, if the Security Council goes to 1:30, you just cut it off at 1 o'clock and hear them yelling. And thirdly, on the receptions, don't the member state pays for the reception and several thousand more for security? I'm just curious why they have to be cut.
The U.S. owes $674 million for the current year and $381 million for prior years. This is for the regular budget, which is the one that we are talking about. $674 million for the current year and $381 million for the prior years. And they typically tend to pay about $500 million towards the end of the year based on the fiscal period. As far as the Security Council is concerned, obviously the Secretary General's instructions are to conserve cash, but we have not gone ahead doing things blindly. They will always be tempered by the seriousness of the issue at hand. On the receptions, the true cost of the entire operation is not recovered from those events. There are additional costs that we have to incur. And we are now looking at a situation where if we have to maintain the payment of salaries to our staff and not default on any existing vendor services that have already been contracted, we have to conserve all the cash. And if we had not gone into that gap, we would have been okay.
James.
A follow-up question. When Michelle asked you the question, you came up with a full and useful answer on the funding gap. But the question was, you read out a very specific list of measures that are going to be carried out by the UN. You must have done costings on those, how much you're saving a month. What is the monthly saving from those measures? Because there will be some that suspect this is rather symbolic to make the member states feel the pain. What's the actual cost per month of the very specific measures that you read out, the saving?
I would not be able to get to a precise number, but here's what
Surely you must get.
absolutely.
You announce it in a press conference.
No, but here's the issue. We know that we need a certain amount of money for our salaries, right? And I mentioned it to you already. We need $92 million for salaries. We need another $45 million for the associated costs. On average, we spend about $45 to $50 million with all the measures that we put in place to keep the number within the threshold that we can afford with the cash. Now we are at a point where I still need the $135 million to pay the salaries. I cannot even afford to pay the $40 million. So I have to save every penny that I have to save. And what choices do I have? Do I say now, don't pay the air charter bills that we have to have for Afghanistan? That's the kind of call we are making on a daily basis. So we don't have complete visibility to say that I can pick and choose this one and say, this is going to save me X amount of money. Clearly, we're trying to say all the non-post costs, that anything that can be postponed to minimize the impact should be postponed so that we can see globally where we stand.
I entirely understand the big problem you're facing and the difficulty you're facing, but I just find it rather odd that you come into a press conference listing the savings you're going to make very, very specifically, and you don't work out how much you're saving by those savings on a monthly basis. It seems to be rather strange.
But that's what I'm trying to say. The expenditure that I would normally incur is about $45 million, $50 million. I can't even afford that.
How much does it cost to turn off the fountain? How much are you saving a month?
I have to check with my colleagues, yeah. But we can get that information. We do know those numbers, though.
Hi, it's Zachary Doty from Newsday. A quick question. I may have missed it in the beginning, but did you say earlier what the total outstanding amount of money is in arrears and the number of countries that would represent? That flows across.
The total outstanding for the regular budget is now $1.385 million. Sorry, $1,385 million outstanding for the regular budget. No, $1,385 million. So $1.385 billion. That's for the cumulative. It's cumulative. Everything combined. The assessment for the current year, 2019, was $2.85 billion. And we collected about 1.99 out of that. So that's the gap for the current year. But the cumulative outstanding is 1.385 billion.
Okay. We will let me just say, we have Ms. Pollard's presentation and her slides that she presented to the Fifth Committee are all online. I'll circulate the link so you have it because it's
just my follow-up. The second part of my question.
Go ahead, Zach. Yeah.
Just the number of countries that represents that are in arrears.
65 countries that haven't paid. That amount comes from, but the seven countries account for 97% of the money, and all of the others combined account for about 2.5%. It's on our website. It'll be the U.S., Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Iran, Israel, and Venezuela.
Okay, and sorry, of the 63, was it? How many are from this year and how many are arrears from previous years? Because this is the trouble with the figures, with us trying to work it out, is comparing light with light.
We'll circulate the
circulate
exact figures. Yes, Mr. Sato.
Thank you. You just mentioned two numbers about the U.S. Lack of funding. So is it common for U.S. or some member states not to pay the previous year's budget? And also, how U.S. explained to the UN about the not paying even the previous year's budget?
Member states, when they make a payment, tend to specify which payment it relates to. The assessment letters are separate for each year. They specify, but our financial regulations disregard that. We don't care what they say. We apply it to the first earliest outstanding amount. That's the way our regulation works.
Hi, Carrie Norton for Le Monde and RFI. I'm new here. I just arrived last month, so I would like to understand how extraordinary these measures are, or is it taken how often do you have to take this type of measures? That's my first part of question. And second part of question is there's a big trip to Addis Ababa for the Security Council plan in 2 weeks' time. Is there could the new measures jeopardize it?
How extraordinary. I think one of the slides that we are circulating today, which you will see, will show you the trend of the cash balances for the last 10 years. And what you will see is a curve that goes like this. The entire trend of the cash. Two things that are happening there. Every year, the deficit that we run into is happening earlier in the year. The deficit is staying on longer, and the deficit is becoming deeper. So all three. Starts earlier, lingers longer, becomes deeper. And last 2 years, last year and this year, we've run out of our normal liquidity reserves completely. And we had to finance our regular budget operations with a small pot of money that member states have not taken back for closed peacekeeping missions. That acted as a buffer. We informed the General Assembly that's what we've done. And it's the same pool of money that is keeping the UN operational. If we did not have that pool of money, and if we had not taken all the actions that we had taken previously, it's doubtful whether we would have had the liquidity to run the General Assembly this session. As to the visit to Addis Ababa, again, we are evaluating every travel based on its seriousness and trying to see if it's absolutely critical. Is there a way to cut down the cost, minimize the number of people who can go? Can we do video conferences to some extent? So it's based on an assessment of the seriousness of each specific. It's not a complete ban on travel. We can't afford to do that because there'll be serious consequences. We're trying to evaluate them as we move along.
So have you discussed it?
Pardon? I would think it's probably going to go ahead, but I would have to confirm that. Yeah.
Let's do it, and then young lady. Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. My name is Masood Haider. I represent Dawn of Newspaper of Pakistan. I've been reporting about this shortfall in funding forever since I've been here, and that the United States has always been at the forefront of not paying the dues. Now, and you have been now listing all the things that can be. So the last measure that I want to ask you, draconian measure, is there any time that you foresee that the United Nations itself will be shut down the way things are going?
On the regular budget side, what we have noticed so far is the problem of liquidity is essentially of the order of about $300 million. And it typically tends to happen between August and October. So it's a liquidity problem for a temporary period of time. And so we've explained to the member states that if they could give us an additional liquidity for that period of time, a lot of these problems could be mitigated. So, but there has not been an agreement on providing that extra liquidity. And so if the arrears start mounting, that's when we would have a serious problem with sustaining operations. At the moment, a $300 million gap for about 3 or 4 months maximum is what is causing the bulk of the problem. But because we cannot default on payments, we have to plan for it throughout the year. And we also do not have the ability to predict exactly when we'll pay. One last point to keep in mind, part of the problem that we are seeing is a shift in the pattern of payments. Countries that used to pay earlier are paying later. Countries that traditionally paid later have a larger share of the budget to pay for. Countries that used to pay earlier have a smaller share of the budget. So that's also now impacting the momentum of the payment. So if all payments were made and if we did not have an arrears and if you had a good liquidity, you'd be able to manage more easily. So to answer your question, if the arrears keep building up, and there's no reason to think that they are building up because they are not going up dramatically. So that's the key. If the arrears don't build up significantly and the liquidity doesn't go down, we should be still okay.
So the question still remains, is there, given these possibilities, is there a possibility of United Nations shutting down completely?
If the trend, if you look at the graph that we've been circulating, if you can look at the trend and extrapolate the trend, you will pretty much see that at some point we're running out of liquidity reserves so often that everything depends on the liquidity. If the liquidity runs down, then we'll have to start thinking of how do we prioritize the payments. And there will come a point when either you'll not have enough staff to run the place or you'll not be able to pay your vendors. So if the trend continues.
Hello, I'm Carla Rajwal. I'm one of the DAG fellows from Trinidad and Tobago. First of all, are there any sort of punitive measures against these member states who don't want to pay? I know they're obligated, but clearly they don't seem to be holding on to that obligation. And secondly, if you don't meet like the liquidity targets will you start to have like liquidating assets? And which assets would you have to start liquidating if that's the case?
That's an interesting thought, but it's not.
I volunteer to be liquidated.
Yeah, I was in an internal budget committee meeting yesterday, and I had a similar kind of questions. And one of the things I told them was that they say, if you save the money, does it solve the problem? It doesn't solve the problem because it's not a budgetary problem; it's a liquidity problem. So how long can I keep on selling? We're talking about $300 million deficit in a $5.5 billion operation per year for 3 or 4 months in a year. Typically, in a commercial organization, you would have the ability to have an equity line of credit, borrow the money, maybe pay $4 or $5 million, and the problem could vanish. We don't have the ability in our regulations to borrow. And unless member states are willing to allow us to borrow, we can't do that. On the issue of punitive measures, the charter provides for voting rights to be lost when they accumulate more than 2 years of arrears. That's the only measure that's available in the process. We have proposed additional measures like not returning credits to those who don't pay, but member states have to agree to those, and they haven't agreed so far.
Well, just to follow up, has anybody ever been in arrears beyond two years to fall for that?
No, it is, and there's a public list. There are a number of countries that are in arrears. Nabil, and then I think we'll have to let Chandru go. Okay, so he yields to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's just to explain this to the people on the street about the UN having this cash crisis. You were talking about having to pay staff and also having to pay vendors. Can you just give us an idea of who are some of these vendors that have to be paid and what services do they provide?
Our vendors are so many. We have. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to say. All I know is that we pay for air charter alone billions of dollars. Then we pay. So it's a mix, right? If you look at the regular budget, our budget is predominantly people and facilities. So rent, leases, where we don't own buildings. But the bulk, nearly 70 to 75% of our budget is all about people. And the rest of it is probably a lot of IT to support those people and facilities. That's it. If you're talking of special political missions, they may have air charter services. If it's peacekeeping, the bulk would be fuel, rations, and air charter. They would be the main vendors.
Security. How much the security of the UN is compromised because of these measures in New York, in different headquarters or centers around the world?
We are prioritizing security. In fact, that's why in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and also in all the major duty stations, so we do not compromise on staff security or the security of our assets. And that's why we prioritize those, and that's why we have to hold off other expenses.
Chandru, thank you. If you have the courage, please stay for the regular briefing. But we've already paid for the room, so we might as well use it. Yeah.
Well, let me go and try and solve some other problems.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Bring bags of cash next time.
Thank you for the opportunity.